Hello, my fellow strawmen, and welcome back to the Fields of Hay. Today we'll be looking at another incredibly popular apologist and founder of Prager University, Dennis Prager. I'm somewhat surprised by how much of his content I had to trawl through to find clips where he even vaguely tries to justify his beliefs. Turns out, most of his content is aimed at reinforcing previously established beliefs, which isn't really of interest to me, so this is likely to be my only video on him. With that said, our first clip is titled, Does God Exist? So let's hope we get a reason why Dennis thinks the answer is yes.
I turn the tables on the atheist and on the agnostic. I say, wait a minute. You ask me if when I look at human suffering, I ever doubt God's existence. Fair question, answer, yes. But I ask you the agnostic or you the atheist, you the irreligious, do you ever see human beauty? Do you ever see the birth of a child and doubt your atheism?
In general, sure, I doubt my atheism. Even though I profess as close to certainty as I can that I think no God exists and base it off what I perceive to be a reasonable argument, the simple fact remains that I could be wrong. But that doubt is based on general intellectual honesty and the recognition of my own human imperfections. It's not so much that I look at beauty or childbirth and think that there is some apparent contradiction with my atheism. But regardless, this has little to do with whether God exists. Yes, both sides should always leave some room for doubt, but I'd like to hear why Dennis thinks atheism cannot account for some fact of this world.
It's a very interesting thing in our world today. The only people who are supposed to question themselves are religious people.
Well, that's nonsense. Everyone should question themselves. The truth has nothing to fear from skepticism, so self-reflection and doubt are good things. If my beliefs are true, then doubt will help me understand the nuances of that truth. And if my beliefs are false, then doubt will hopefully help me find my way out of the falsehood. So I should question and challenge my beliefs, no matter how certain I am.
Irreligious people are never asked to challenge themselves. Isn't that interesting?
It's not, because it's objectively false. What about all those street preachers who challenge people's lack of faith? Irreligious people are challenged all the time, including in this very clip.
You never hear that, do you? You ever challenge your secularism?
That's a different thing, but sure, you can doubt that too. But secularism is about separating personal beliefs from overt influence in the public sphere. It's as much about preventing laws from being passed which exclude Christians or Jews as it is about preventing the exclusion of pagans, Satanists, Muslims, Hindus, humanists, or any other sect. If you want to challenge secularism, you probably have to favor one of these groups to the point of dismissing the rights of the other groups. So don't be surprised if you have trouble getting along with those outside your bubble.
Never, never. It's a non-issue. If you believe in God, you're supposed to challenge yourself all the time. Religious people, gee, they're brainwashed. As if secular people aren't brainwashed.
So I clicked on Dennis's video because it's called Does God Exist? I expected it to make a case for God's existence, but so far it's just Dennis lying about how atheists like me never doubt their beliefs, even while I stand here telling you that yes, doubt is a good thing. Now he says that secular people are brainwashed, even while secularism encompasses all sorts of different beliefs. I honestly don't think Dennis understands the words coming out of his own mouth.
You never hear the secular challenge grappled with at Harvard or at Stanford or, for that matter, at UNLV. It's just not an issue. It's so taken as for granted that God is a non-issue, religion is a non-issue, that people don't even bother making up intellectual arguments for it.
At the state-funded public school I went to, I can go onto the student organization list and search the keyword Christ, and 31 groups come up. 31 Christ-related organizations, from Baptists to Catholics to Mormons to Lutherans and many, many more. Outside my personal experience, Prager mentions Harvard, Stanford, and UNLV. Stanford has a section in its club catalog that lists 24 Christian clubs, and UNLV's lists 12. Harvard's requires a login, so I can't speak for them. But in general, I have no idea what Prager is claiming about nobody bothers with religion, when in actuality it's one of the most popular things on college campuses. Plenty of people, faculty and students, pursue spiritual health. And sure, the college administrators don't require religious credits to graduate, but that's because people simply don't need it for their professional degree. Dennis doesn't seem to realize that it's an entirely personal choice to spend time thinking about those things. And there are plenty of people who do choose to grapple with God's existence. I know I did, and it culminated in me coming up with the argument device and eventually making this channel.
I think the intellectual arguments, the rational case for God is stronger than the intellectual arguments and the rational case against God.
Finally, we get to the topic of the video. Its title asks whether God exists, and finally Dennis is about to present his reason for why, yes, we should think he exists. Except, you can see from the end cards, this is the end of the clip. He makes this whole point about how secularists don't give enough consideration to religion, and that we should challenge our beliefs more, and then cuts the video just before he gives a reason that might do just that. I couldn't find the continuation of this clip elsewhere on his channel, so if you know where it is, please send it to me. But as it stands, I find this clip from Dennis very disappointing. He completely fails to make a case for God's existence, instead choosing to bitch and moan about how unfair the conversation is for dismissing religious arguments. So let's get to our next clip, which comes from a conversation Dennis has with Eric Metaxas. The title says they're discussing atheism, which is enough to summon me to listen to what they have to say. We'll pick up with them talking about Eric's book, which covers archaeological evidence they claim supports the Bible.
Most of the book is science and archaeology. I mean, for example, I got to ask you, did you even know that they had discovered biblical Sodom?
So what if they have? The Bible's ability to tell stories about places that really existed doesn't mean that the other parts of the story are true. A town existing or being destroyed are natural events. They aren't the parts of the Bible I would particularly doubt. So let's see if Eric has any evidence of a woman turning to salt or of angels visiting Lot's house.
The only thing that could create what they discovered at this Tel Haman in Jordan, which we now know is biblical Sodom, is what they call a cosmic airburst event. In other words, an asteroid, meteor, whatever, about 180 feet in diameter, so not that big, coming into the Earth's atmosphere at about 35,000 miles an hour, explodes a few miles above the surface and creates a heat of such intensity, 700-mile-an-hour winds just obliterates everything.
So I'm not a geologist, but let's say that the evidence is there and that we have this site that was blown up by a meteor. How do we know if that meteor was the fire and brimstone sent by God in vengeance for Sodom and Gomorrah's sin, or if those towns just happened to be unfortunate, like how Pompeii was unfortunate? How do we know the Bible didn't just mythologize the reasons behind a perfectly natural obliteration of the towns? It seems perfectly reasonable to me that the Bible accurately recorded a city being destroyed in a cataclysm, but there are other details to the story, like Lot finding favor in God's eyes, his wife turning to a pillar of salt, and his daughters raping him. This simply isn't evidence that those details are true.
The more details you get, I wrote 1 or 2 chapters about it, but it's just incontrovertible. You say this is amazing. You might say, oh well, I still don't believe in God, but you no longer can say the Bible is folklore or myth.
Yes, I can. I do say the Bible is folklore and myth mixed into the historical accounts. Having confirmation that Sodom was destroyed in an unusual way lining up with the biblical record only demonstrates that the biblical myths originated with people who were around to witness that destruction. Eric and Dennis would be happy to agree with this in some other context. There's a city on the Indian coast, and forgive my pronunciation, called Mahabalipuram, which is the subject of a centuries-old Hindu legend of a great city with 7 temples, which was almost entirely swallowed by the sea for angering some god, leaving only a single temple. Recently, divers off the coast of the city have found extensive ruins, including 6 temples, seeming to corroborate the story. Does that mean that Eric and Dennis think the Hindu Vedas are real? I suspect not, despite it being the exact same kind of evidence they present for their Bible.
Point is that now science is leading us to God. It is showing that the intricacy of the universe's design and the Earth's design, it's so exquisite, it's so mind-numbing. You almost can't take in how perfectly calibrated every detail is, including down to simple things like the composition of water, that when you take it in, it's almost frightening.
I'll link my response to the fine-tuning argument here, but no, I don't see any calibration in the universe's existence that indicates God. Even if it's unlikely for some molecules to have the properties water has, the water we all know and love is accounted for by how many molecules there are. You'd think that out of all the thousands of compounds commonly found across our universe, out of all the combinations of elements and all the material phases they can exhibit, one of them would have some pretty special material properties. The fact that there's one that can dissolve polar molecules and has high heat capacity and is less dense as a solid than as a liquid, yeah, it's pretty cool, but it's perfectly explainable as part of the natural variation of having so many different molecules in this universe.
You think, who is this God who created this universe? Now, this is what science is saying, and you can't get around it. The only way they get around it is by saying, well, everything's really perfect, fine, but that's just in this universe. There's probably a multiplicity of an infinity of other universes, and we just happen to be lucky we're in the right one.
In that fine-tuning argument I linked earlier, I make no reference to a multiverse as a necessary part of the explanation. I see the multiverse as a possibility that is at least as plausible as God, and that it holds sufficient explanatory power to solve the fine-tuning problem. But it is entirely unfalsifiable and unscientific. There could be a multiverse, I have no idea how to rule one out, but I don't exactly stand by the idea that there must be one either. My solution is much simpler, which is that we simply don't know what the probabilities are that the universe is life-supporting. The percentages often quoted, like gravity being 1 in 10 to the 60, aren't percent probabilities, they're percent changes. They're entirely irrelevant. Eric can't tell you what the probability is that there exists a chemical with material properties necessary to catalyze biochemistry. He just assumes that something like water is so improbable that no natural cause could account for it. If he were honest, he would admit that he doesn't know these probabilities, and then realize that this fine-tuning argument has nothing going for it. It has a burden of proof, and it falls apart by resting its case on an entirely unknown probability.
That's 1,000 times more preposterous than saying, I
yes,
believe in the God of the Bible.
It's unworthy of scientists to even say it.
The multiverse hypothesis may be unfalsifiable and unscientific, but so is God. If Dennis and Eric are willing to follow pure philosophical reasoning to God, they have to be willing to follow pure philosophical reasoning to a multiverse, if that's where the reasoning leads. It's as equally valid a possibility as God. It's dishonest of them to just throw it out without any consideration. It's especially ironic after Dennis complains in the first clip about secular institutions being closed-minded, and here he is giving us a textbook example of closed-mindedness by saying that a multiverse shouldn't even be considered. The rest of this clip is talking about what God was up to in the 60s and plugging Eric's book, so on to the next one about Dennis's belief in a judging God.
God judges the world these 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. To me, it is the sanity keeper. If I didn't believe God judged people, I would be a less happy human being. A lot of my peace of mind rests on my belief that God judges, punishes, and rewards. If the evil get away with what they do and the good who suffer are not compensated in the afterlife, God has made a very despicable world. And I don't believe he has. So it is my sanity keeper, my belief in a judging God.
On the one hand, I understand why Dennis needs to believe in an afterlife. I too see it as critical to the solution of the problem of evil. If an all-good God exists, then this suffering-filled world cannot be the end goal. It must be a stepping stone to some greater goal. But I only need to solve this problem of evil if I have some reason to think God exists, and Dennis doesn't provide that here. Maybe this is a stretch, but it makes me think that his belief in a judging God is not his rational solution to a reasoned belief in God. It makes me think that he is scared of what it would mean if there were no God, if there were no judgment. I don't think Dennis has ever truly given atheism fair consideration because he rejects it emotionally. But basing our beliefs about reality and what we hope to be true, what gives us comfort, is a poor method to reach truth because it can reach mutually exclusive conclusions with the same method. I can say that I find comfort in the idea that death will be a peaceful rest. It wasn't so bad before I was born, why should it be so bad after? But if God exists and judges me, potentially to send me to eternal torment, and I don't even know by what standard I'll be judged, then that terrifies me. I'd have no peace of mind that I chose the right God and lived my life by the right standards. If I say that believing that God doesn't exist is what allows me to keep my sanity, surely no theist would find that to be a convincing argument. No, they'd call it out for what it is, an emotional argument, and a poor reason to dismiss God. It isn't a path to truth, and Dennis's willingness to take it tells me that he cares more about emotional comfort than truth. And for the record, I am disappointed that the most despicable people sometimes get away with their crimes, and that so many innocent people so often suffer for no greater benefit they get to reap later. I think it'd be great if there was some perfect justice in the afterlife, but I don't expect there will be. To me, that makes it all the more important to see justice delivered here on Earth. I want to see governmental systems put in place that stand up for the innocent and protect them from those who would harm others. I want to see independent oversight agencies set over them to hold those in the seat of power accountable, so that power is wielded responsibly. I know it's easier said than done, but the difficulty we face in finding a way to do this agreeably in our societies is no reason to believe in a God. Now that was one very long response for one very short clip, so I've got one last one to wrap up this video. It's about how to change the declining trend in religiosity, so maybe we'll get an argument to help me refine my religiosity.
Fewer Americans attend church weekly than at any time in American history.
True, I can see why to a believer this is problematic, but if people aren't given any good reasons to attend, then I see no problems with this trend continuing. What do you think the odds are that we'll be given a reason, or that we'll be given an excuse as to why he can't provide a reason?
I pointed out to my fellow Jews that when Americans went to church, Jews were more secure.
I have practically no political power, but for whatever my 2 cents are worth, I believe religious freedom for the individual should be strongly protected. I believe that people shouldn't be judged merely for the group they identify with. Those who are discriminated against for their identity, whether they be Catholic or Jew, Protestant or Hindu, Muslim or atheist, or any other group, if they haven't personally committed some crime, they should be protected under the law from those who want to harm or exclude them. At the same time, none of them should be shown preference or given free rein over the others. It's the secular protections that help keep this balance, so Dennis doesn't need to worry about declining religiosity. He needs to worry about declining secularity.
So this is what I have done all of my life to persuade people to take the Bible seriously. My business is to get them to take biblical beliefs and values seriously. For me, the Bible is the bigger issue even than God. There are vast numbers of people around the world who believe in God, and it has nothing to do with the God of the Bible. It's usually some deity in heaven whom they invoke for protection. And that's not what the purpose of belief is.
Does Dennis have no self-awareness? Didn't he just say in the last clip that judgment in the afterlife is central to his beliefs? Who does Dennis look to for protection in the afterlife, if not his deity in heaven, Yahweh? If he wants to dismiss other beliefs for invoking a deity to protect them, then I'll just dismiss his for the same reason, and he can be a hypocrite if he complains that's unfair. If his goal is to get me to take biblical beliefs seriously, he's doing more harm than good.
So my approach, first of all, has been entirely toward the intellect. I don't know any other approach because it is my mind that has given me faith. I approach God through the mind much more than through the heart.
Two things I want to say about this. First, approach through the heart or through the mind is all just flowery language. I'd appreciate an approach through intellect, knowledge, and reason, and would like to avoid one based on emotion and bias. I think that's what Dennis is saying, so fine, I agree with that. Second, he can say his mind gives him faith all he wants. Faith is not an intellectual, knowledgeable, reasonable tool. Faith is holding to your beliefs in spite of the evidence you find. Faith is deciding that of all the possibilities on the table, the other ones are wrong because you'd rather not consider them. If he plans to use his intellect to approach God, using faith is about as poor a starting point as he could have.
Many people in the modern age use their mind to reject God, the Bible, etc. So if they think that it is their mind that cannot accept God, God-based morality, etc., then I have to appeal to their mind. If the mind is the source of the rejection, then the mind has to be approached, right? So the number one in my approach to having people take religion, specifically the Bible, seriously, is through the intellect.
So far, Dennis has given the setup that there are rational and persuasive arguments for God. If it feels like I've cut him off from making the actual argument, I'm sorry for the frustration, but it's not me. Dennis just goes off on some tangent advertising his other lectures and eventually comes back to repeat this point. But he never finishes it. I can only assume he's referencing some argument about how a rational mind couldn't exist naturally, and so using our faculties to dismiss God is a contradiction. But he never considers how any natural processes could lead to a rational mind and explain why those processes are insufficient. If this is the argument he's making, it's just an argument from ignorance. Our lack of knowledge about how exactly nature accounts for rational minds doesn't mean that a God is required. Now, if instead of concluding that intellect has some transcendent cause beyond the natural, we were to conclude that it must simply have a cause, that it couldn't be uncaused, I would actually agree. This is essentially what I conclude with my argument of ice. In short, the information inherent in a human or superhuman intellect is so vast and so particular that it should, if uncaused, be scrambled and schizophrenic to the point of not being particularly intelligent at all. The carefully balanced complexity that is a rational will couldn't exist without cause. But if you're a theist, you may want to be careful agreeing with me on this. After all, God is an uncaused rational mind, and so my argument rules God out. If God exists, he must be a solipsist, and so his existence doesn't really solve the question of how an intellect comes to be.
Can you prove to me God exists? Of course not. But I can prove to you beauty exists. I can't prove to you a whole host of positive things. I can't prove to you that the good and evil exist. Where's the proof? Show me the measuring stick. Show me the chemical bases. What is the chemical constituents? What are the chemical constituents of good or evil? There is very little that matters that can be proven. But there are arguments that are persuasive.
I don't need proof for beauty because I can accept that it doesn't actually exist, that it only exists subjectively for me or for others. The same goes for good and evil. They don't need to literally exist for me to act on them and use them as guiding concepts in my life. But if God doesn't literally exist, then he can't keep the promises that he supposedly made to Abraham. He can't enact judgment in the afterlife. He can't make up for the suffering in this life. Dennis is acting as though atheists are inconsistent to ask for evidence of God when we don't ask for evidence of good and evil and beauty. But it is consistent, because good and evil and beauty are not claimed to exist the same way God exists. God is claimed to exist as a being whom humans can interact with. You won't see Prager complain about being unable to prove anything else in that category, like his wife or his parents or his children. Other people matter, and their existence can be proven at least as much as anything else, so why can't God? Ultimately, he never goes on to give an actual argument here, despite his claim that there are persuasive ones out there, so this all comes off as an excuse for the theistic arguments being so weak. The closest he comes to actually making an argument is a vague reference to the idea that a mind requires God, and so you can't rationally use your mind to reject a God, so checkmate. But under scrutiny, this just reduces to an argument from ignorance. For a man who admits that he believes in God off an emotional desire to see justice in the afterlife, I suppose this sort of ad hoc justification is to be expected. He further promotes meteor impacts as corroboration of the supernatural, and whines about his misguided ideas that the irreligious don't challenge themselves. He is not a wise old sage. He's a confused and lost soul who I hope finds his way back to truth. If you want to avoid that fate, I'm sure you can guess my advice. Go and read a fucking book.